Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are on the Southern Chaos Wastes playing as the Dark Elves against the forces of the Vampire Counts. So in this matchup, there is quite a bit of sort of gameplay and stuff that the Dark Elves can do, but I figured that potentially one of the things that could work out is a very Chaos-esque build, especially with the recent nerf to Mortis Engine, which has made it a bit of less of a viable sort of option in most matchups. I figured that just sort of copying or doing something similar to what Chaos does, where you mass chosen and then stack up a few monsters and powerful single models on top of them, could be very useful. So what I decided to do here for my composition, you can see the numbers are very low, only about 300 troops. I did decide to bring Morathi. She's, of course, a solid support lord, fairly cheap. She does have AP, anti-large, all that good stuff. She's pretty mobile, pretty hard to snipe out just because of that mobility. And in this case, I did decide to bring in basically her full kit, just missing a handful of spells. We do, of course, have Soul Blight, Melkoth's Miasma, Power of Darkness, and Soul Steal, which is great to keep her alive. More importantly, perhaps against the Undead, she does have two sets of melee attack debuffs, and Undead have very low melee attack to begin with. For example, Graveguard in this situation, even the Sternsmen only have 34 melee attack, Graveguard only have 25, and Morathi, when she's in melee, is knocking that down by 18. So essentially 75% and about 75% of the normal Graveguard, about 60% of the Sternsmen's melee attack is going down the drain. Now granted, their bonus for infantry does remain against the Blackguard, but nonetheless, it's a pretty significant nerf to their melee attack. Skeleton Spearmen down to 0. If we look at the Dire Pack, they're down a whole bunch. Direwolves are down to only 8. Is a pretty major debuff. And stacked on top of the Blackguard, who are an amazing unit in this matchup, they've got immunity to psychology. The physical resistance here is actually being granted by the Death Hag, but they've got monstrous melee defense, they've got 100 armor, they've got AP, they've got huge weapon strength, very solid melee attack. All in all, they're just a very well-rounded unit that can basically slaughter anything Undead bring to the table to begin with. Stack on top of that all these debuffs, and they are a very tough nut to crack. I also decided to bring in a few other sort of supporting tools here. Death Hag, which I think is not a bad choice. I did bring the Chill Blade. Of course, she's a chariot. She's going to be able to sort of run amok through enemy infantry lines. She does apply poison, which will once again help these Blackguards. So much here is going to help the Blackguards survive. Physical resist coming in from the Death Hag, 6%. Not huge, but it's something. She is providing that Chill Blade, which is a further -5 melee attack, so -23 between her and Morathi, potentially. Fury of Cain, which is a single target buff, and this is actually very useful for Blackguard, who don't have the greatest offense stats necessarily. This means that if I, for example, need to wipe out the Sternsmen really quickly or wipe out the Graveguard, I can drop this buff on the Blackguard, and they will do the job very admirably. Finally, of course, we did bring Foeseeker just to keep it alive. The Fear and Terror here is not particularly important, but nonetheless, the Death Hag is a pretty tough nut to crack, and is a pretty good support tool all in her own right. One of the main counters to this build, and honestly a lot of Dark Elf builds, is actually Wraith units and Ethereal units. Dark Elves don't have the greatest access to magic damage, believe it or not. It might seem odd, but with the exception of Doomfire Warlocks, who themselves are very bad against magic damage, which Ethereal units bring to the field, and spells of their own, Dark Elves don't actually have much magic damage. So what I decided to bring here was the Sorcerers of Fire to compensate for that. So we are going with a double caster build. She is coming in with Burning Head, so we've got a lot of spells. We've got 7 spells between her and Morathi, so I really wasn't sure what I wanted to bring here, and figured, you know, we've got some gold left over, might as well do some work. So we did bring Burning Head to clear out chaff mobs. Flaming Sword of Ruin, once again, mostly just to deal with ethereal units in the odd chance that my opponent brought them. Cascading Fire Cloak for that sort of extra survivability. It is a pretty cheap spell, and it's often pretty useful. It's basically always useful, so I figured it's worth bringing. And then, of course, Darkstar Cloak and Kindle Flame to synergize with Lord of Fire, and just to get more Winds of Magic. Because if we are going double caster, might as well be going all out, trying to get as much wins as we can. Finally, the final addition here is the Charybdis, the big baddie, beauty, as we all know. Just look at that cutie patootie. But it's an absolute beast of a monster. It can tear through basically any Vampire Count unit in a straight up 1v1. The Abyssal Howl is not particularly useful here, but between the poison, the anti-large, and the armor piercing, it will perform very admirably against basically anything the Vampire Counts bring. And now with the nerfs to the Mortis Engine, if my opponent tries to, say, siphon off, I can always sick the Charybdis on him, and the Charybdis will wreck Mortis Engine incredibly quickly. It's a very, very potent unit, and definitely going to see how it performs here. So my opponent's build. Bit of an interesting take on things. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this sort of building as Vampire Counts, but perhaps there is something to it. You can see for his lord, he did decide to bring Heinrich Kemmler. He's become a bit more of a meta pick lately. He still has the issue with survivability. He's very, very squishy, but of course he does have Raised Dead. He does have Invocation of Neck. He's very cheap. He does have Curse of Years, Lord of Undeath, which allows him to summon Krell, Cloak of Mist and Shadows to a little bit compensate for that survivability issue, Undeath Resurgent, and the Chaos Tombblade, which is great AoE heal and melee attack buff. So definitely very nice. Like I said, Heinrich Himmler does have an issue with survivability. He also has an issue with casting. One of the big problems with Heinrich Himmler, and one of the things that, even though I sometimes use him, this does turn me off from him as a sort of mainstay lord, is the fact that he doesn't have great Winds of Magic regeneration. You'd think that for a Necromancer, given that this guy's supposed to be a Necromancer lord, he's supposed to be the Arch Necromancer or whatever, you'd think he'd have Arcane Conduit, or the better Arcane Conduit, the greater Arcane Conduit. He has neither, which is kind of pitiful. And it makes it hard for him to cast reliably. And of course, he's not a great melee lord, so it's a tough situation. However, for the rest of the build here, a bunch of Graveguard in the front line. These guys would do great against other Dark Elf infantry, but against Blackguard, they're not going to do great. They are backed by the Königstein Stalkers as well as a Corpse Cart with Unholy Lodestone, so some decent sort of support tools there. Some poison, some anti-large with the Skeleton Spears, as well as some additional sort of staying power. They do have okay melee defense, which honestly against Blackguard, they can kind of hold a surprise. For their cost, they will hold very, very well. On the one flank, Dire Pack and Dire Wolves, just probably to zone out sort of light infantry, light cavalry, light units, light infantry, perhaps like Shades. If you've seen my one replay where I do utilize the Dire Pack against the Slaanesha's Harvesters, they're actually an incredibly potent force. They can actually tear through Doomfire Warlocks very effectively because they just do so much damage to those lightly armored large units. In the meantime, on the other flank, my opponent does have 2 units of Blood Knights, so an absolutely terrifying shock force, even against the Blackguard. However, things are kicking off right away. You can see I've simply plowed into the center here with the Death Hag, who does pop all of her buffs, and we are immediately popping Fury of Cain on the Blackguard here because I want to knock out the Sternsmen as quickly as I can. And you can see the Blackguard are just going to town, and these guys with that significant buff to their melee attack, they will be able to tear through the Sternsmen like paper mache. However, my opponent is summoning Krell, and Krell, of course, has been buffed recently. He does have a bonus for large, and he's going to start laying the smackdown on my Death Hag and the Charybdis. And you can see the Charybdis here definitely hurting the Corpse Guard with Unholy Lodestone, causing it to waver and actually causing it to start crumpling. So it's almost dead already within the space of a few hits. But a big mistake here on my part. Rather than finishing off the Corpse Cart here, I'm actually just going to walk off with my monsters, and that's gonna mean the Corpse Cart's gonna be able to recover. Over here, another big mistake. I do cast the Wand of Greydon on these Blood Knights. It actually barely clips them. I should have waited for them to engage. But you can see I do pull the Charybdis back here, trying to shut down these Blood Knights. As you can see, the battle here is nothing fancy. Not trying to do any sort of tactical maneuvering. Quite frankly, I don't have the ability for it. I've only got 40 units. We're basically just a new box that's going to hold, it's going to stand, and it's either going to win or die. There are no other alternatives here. So you can see here, with the Chill Blade, with the Charybdis applying poison, the Blood Knight's down to 45 speed. They actually are slower than the Charybdis. But my opponent is able to pull them through the Skeleton Spears here, hit them with Invocation of Nag, so they will definitely live to fight another day. However, with the Soul Blight going down, my opponent's damage output being tanked here, and the Blood Knights are just not doing hot and get all against the Charybdis. Despite all of its debuffs, the Charybdis still sits like a truck, and you can see it's taking off multiple models with each hit, and of course now the Blackguard are in the fight, and they're just going to be melting these guys. Sure, Curse of Years is applying those debuffs, but the simple fact of the matter is these guys still have such monstrous bonus versus large. The Blackguard at 24, the Charybdis at I think 35. If we look at it real quick, it's bonus versus large. Oh, never mind, it's 25. Still, monstrous buff. They are just tearing through the Blood Knights. You can see this unit of Blood Knights almost gone. This second unit of Blood Knights getting completely slaughtered. My opponent has not really even managed to crack this Blackguard. This unit up to 61 kills and an additional Chevron, fighting 2 units of Graveguard at once. The unit over here has slaughtered the Sternsmen to a man, or basically is done with him right now, and is now slaughtering the second unit of Graveguard, and they're being backed by the Sorcerer Firewall. Here, this pocket surrounded on all sides by hordes of Graveguard, by Kemmler with the Corpse Cart in there, with Dire Wolves and Dire Pack on the one flank. These guys are still holding there and refusing to surrender, and they just keep fighting to the death, and now the Death Hag pulling through, just plowing through these puppies, and really running amok. In the meantime, the Charybdis just doing monstrous work, destroying these Blood Knights. And rather than letting Krell... Now, Krell's a very solid combatant. He can annihilate large monsters. If you let Krell sit, don't underestimate it. He could do a lot of hurt. But rather than letting Krell do anything crazy here, I simply walk away. Krell is too... He lacks the mass. He lacks the sort of ability to push through. He's such an awesome model. And he's honestly not a bad summon. I definitely don't underestimate him. But I simply ignore him and walk away from him. And we go over here to shut down the Corpse Guard, to shut down the Graveguard. And leave Krell to be sad and alone over there. Meantime, the Blackguard here holding the fort. You can see I've used these Blackguard over here to sort of lock down the spears, to lock down the Graveguard all at the same time, and things are definitely looking okay. The Blood Knights here do commit. They are trying to get in there, but with Morathi's debuffs going down all over the place, with the debuffs from the Death Hag, and of course the Charybdis just being a terror in the night, these Blood Knights really can't find purchase. They've only gotten 4 kills, which for Blood Knight is really not great. Over here, the poor Corpse Cart with the Unholy Lodestone getting torn apart, finally finished off by the Charybdis. You can see it roaring there, and it's victory. And it's just running amok. The Charybdis up to 48 kills, most of those against Blood Knights. It finished off the Corpse Cart. It's just been doing so much work, and Marathi's in there as well, hitting her with all those debuffs. You can see all the melee attacks just tanking on these units. These zombies on 0 melee attack. Of course, they're zombies, but still. You can see all these debuffs, and Soul Stealer coming in from Marathi, which is just annihilating all these units. Of course, even Krell's going to start taking hit from that. And really, my opponent at this point is basically it's basically game over for him. The Graveguard over here, while they are outnumbering these Blackguard, the Blackguard are simply have too much of a qualitative edge on the Graveguard to lose out. Over here, the Blackguard is able to sort of anchor its line, and there's Kemmler, while having surprisingly decent melee stats for a sorcerer, or for a caster, is really not going to be able to do much to these guys, and definitely not going to hold his own. And in the meantime, Kemmler here, who was trying to, or Krell, sorry, who was trying to do what he could, is finally being massacred by Marathi and the Charybdis. I finally decided, you know what, we've had enough. We're going to finish Krell off, teach him a lesson once and for all. Not going exactly to plan, honestly. He's a small target. I probably should have kept ignoring him and gone to finish Kemmler, but greed here overcame logic, and honestly, my opponent here doesn't really have the tools to win anymore. Blackguard here getting swept up a little bit by Blood Knights. The Blood Knights trying to do their best to sort of isolate and prey on units of opportunity, but really it's just too little too late. Kemmler over there getting nuked down. The Blackguard is in the pits, and at this point my opponent's army simply disintegrates for the GG. So if we quickly go over the build, you can see just how brutal those Blackguard are. My opponent's build, 1,000, going with 1,000 units, and the vast majority of them were just slaughtered by these core 5 units. The Death Hag, of course, can do immense amounts of work mounted on her Cauldron. The Blackguard gaining multiple chevrons. I think every single Blackguard unit in this game gained 2 chevrons throughout the course of the fight, which is crazy. And they weren't fighting trash tier infantry. This isn't like they were massacring zombies. They were honestly fighting Graveguard. They were fighting Königstein Stalkers. These aren't amazing infantry by any means, but they're also not terrible infantry. So honestly, if you're a Vampire Count player, my advice to you is to bring some Graveguard with way weapons. They are a decent choice. They won't win against the higher end sort of units, or try to bring Cairn Wraiths perhaps, but you are risking, of course, if your opponent's smart, they'll bring a Flaming Sword of Ruin or something like that. But regardless, bring something that can bust heavily armored infantry. It's tough. It's not easy, but you need to bring something. If you bring the Lore of Shadows Vampire, you can perhaps hit these guys with an enfeebling foe, charge in with your Graveguard with great weapons, wipe them out that way. You can try to use the Van Hels's Dance Macabre. Vlad is probably a decent choice here, because you can use Vlad's debuffs to make your Graveguard hold out better, while at the same time Vlad's an okay caster, and you can potentially just crack that Graveguard in a conventional Slugfest. In this sort of situation, surrounded on all sides, the Graveguard against these sorts of units just holds way too well. One unit Blood Knight's wiped, the other one only gained 10 kills over the course of the game. It just really wasn't cutting the mustard. Charybdis, another tough target. You need to bring something to shut it down. Charybdis is just a beast. It's meant to kill big monsters. It compensates. It suffers for this in a lot of ways. It's very weak against missile pressure. I see it a lot of times in my Bretonnia games and just annihilate it with peasant bows. It's really not good against missiles. It's really weak against infantry. It's honestly not a great unit against anything but large. But against large is an absolute beast. And my opponent here just couldn't really crack it. He couldn't crack the Blackguard line, and he couldn't really deal with the Charybdis chomping on his knights. So I was definitely very pleased with this build. I definitely think it's pretty viable. You do still have to watch out for Mortis Engines a bit. A well-maneuvered Mortis Engine might be able to pull off some pretty crazy stuff against this sort of build. Obviously, you do have to have that Flaming Sword of Ruin ready if your opponent decides to go with an Ethereal build. Definitely be wary of that. If you're playing as a Dark Elf player, always be wary of, against Vampire Counts, always be very wary of Ethereal units. Honestly, the Green Knight's not even a bad pick as Bretonnia against Dark Elves, basically for the exact same reason. His monstrous physical resist means that Dark Elves don't have too many tools to crack him. So definitely do keep that in mind. Marathi doing pretty well, so I wasn't disappointed there either. And the Charybdis, just so many chevrons here. Pretty crazy stuff. For my opponent's build, like I said, I don't think it's necessarily the most competitive. I would try to bring some Graveguard with great weapons into the mix. Otherwise, not necessarily bad. Kemmler's a bit of an odd choice. I think Kemmler's very susceptible to sniping, and the Dark Elves have some decent Lord sniping tools, which would have me a little worried. But by and large, I don't think this is that bad of a build, except for the front line choice. I would try to bring some Graveguard with great weapons. They are, of course, susceptible to Dark Shards, but that's what you got summons for. That's what you got zombie summons. That's what you got Raised Dead for. Zone those units out. That's what you've got Dire Pack for, to zone out Dark Riders and that sort of stuff. So Do keep that in mind. Of course, if your opponent does bring the flyers, then you're screwed, but in that case, maybe bring bats. But if they decide to bring the air corps, the what are they called? The Raven Heralds. But nonetheless, good again to my opponent here, Moondoggy. I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it entertaining. If you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe below if you've not already. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions about anything that might come to mind, be sure to leave them down in the comment section below, and I will do my best to respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.